This is CNN Breaking News.
All right, there's breaking news coming out of the Pentagon about the possibility of an Israeli attack on Iran. Let's go right to our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. Barbara, what's going on?
Well, Wolf, we have now confirmed from a senior administration official, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta believes there is a strong likelihood that Israel may strike Iran's nuclear program sometime this spring. Why does the defense secretary believe this? The Israelis have been talking about a so-called zone of immunity. What the Israelis believe is that by this spring, that is their best chance to strike Iran's program with their weapons. After that, they believe Iran will have made enough progress that Israeli weapons cannot get to Iran's nuclear effort. It would only be U.S. weapons. This is the Panetta calculus. He has made these statements to the very respected journalist David Ignatius of the Washington Post, traveling with the secretary in Brussels at that NATO meeting. The secretary was asked about this. He has refused comment, but we have confirmed with an administration official, indeed, Secretary Panetta now has made these statements. He believes these are the potential Israeli intentions, and he believes that the intelligence that the U.S. has gathered about Israeli intentions backs this up at this point. Wolf?
There was an amazing article, the cover story of the New York Times Sunday magazine about Israel's intentions by the Israeli journalist Ronen Bergman, who also concludes at the end of that article that he believes the Israelis will, in fact, launch an attack sometime in the coming months. So if Panetta is saying this, he's saying something similar to what this Israeli journalist wrote in the New York Times over the weekend. But here's the suspicion that some folks have, and let me run it by you, Barbara, and see what you think, that this is all designed psychological warfare, if you will, to put pressure on the Iranians to come around, to comply with the United Nations, the IAEA inspectors, and back down in the face of what is perceived to be an imminent threat from Israel. What are they saying about that?
Yeah, absolutely, Wolf. You are correct. There is a very strong school of thought that that is partially what the Israeli intentions are. We have seen Israel go through these cycles of making very aggressive statements about their intentions and then sort of backing off a bit when the United States or the West moves ahead with sanctions or other actions against other pressures against Iran. So that is a very key point here. You are absolutely right. Look, this is intelligence, espionage, spying at the highest levels, potential military action of crisis proportions. So there's a lot of gamesmanship going on here. It should be remembered. It was General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that just days ago said any U.S. military action against Israel would be premature. This is not something the U.S. wants to do. But right now, their key concern is exactly what are the Israeli intentions? Is Israel just once again making these statements, or is there something else going on here? That's what they're trying to determine. That is part, I believe, of what Panetta is trying to reflect, the great uncertainty in the coming months.
But the breaking news is Panetta telling David Ignatius of the Washington Post that an Israeli strike could take place. These specific, first time I've heard this kind of specific mention, April, May of June. We're in February now, so there's not a whole lot of time. It's a little surprising that Panetta is saying this publicly right now, at least to David Ignatius. But what one suspicion is that maybe he's trying to put some pressure on the Iranians right now to rethink their strategy. The Iranians have been threatening to shut off the Strait of Hormuz as well. The other question is how much cooperation, if the Israeli military were to take action, would there actually be with the U.S. military?
Well, that's a very interesting military dilemma that you pose. The question for the Israeli Air Force will be, can its manned aircraft get past Iranian air defenses, get into Iranian airspace, bomb, and get out before Iranian air defenses, Iranian surface-to-air missiles, Iranian radars pick up word that they are in the air and that they are in Iranian airspace? The general thinking is that Israel, if it came to that, would in fact take the risk of using manned aircraft rather than drones. It's an awful long way to send a drone, but it becomes a very tricky proposition. A lot of people say that Iran has an aging air defense system along that coastline, that you don't have to worry about it all that much. But if you are a pilot in the Israeli Air Force, in the U.S. Air Force, on a combat mission against Iran. You worry about just about everything that could be coming your way. So that's going to be a key question. Would the U.S. know about it when the planes are already in the air? That may be too late for President Obama to try and convince the Israelis to change their mind. So it gets back to this question, Israeli military and Israeli political intentions. Is this real, or as you point out, is this Israel once again trying to pressure the West? It's this spring time frame now that is so interesting, because even Israeli officials have publicly said they believe the window is closing in the spring in terms of Iran's progress on its nuclear program. After that, they're not sure that their own weapons can destroy it, can even get to it, Wolf.
Barbara, hold on. Fran Townsend, our national security contributor, the former Homeland Security advisor to President Bush, is joining us on the phone right now. Fran, we're following the breaking news. Leon Panetta's views as reflected by the Washington Post columnist David Ignatius, who writes just now, he writes, Panetta believes there is strong likelihood that Israel will strike Iran in April, May, or June, before Iran enters what Israelis described as a zone of immunity to commence building a nuclear bomb. What do you make of this development that Panetta is openly speculating about a potentially imminent Israeli strike?
Good afternoon.
Well, Wolf, let's remember, you know, the Secretary Panetta has been openly sort of pontificating a lot this week, right? He said that he believed, though we don't have evidence, that the Pakistanis may have known where bin Laden is. You know, he talked about a source who's in Pakistani custody. I mean, it's all very odd. And if he believes this, if he believes that Israel may strike Iran this spring, why would you put the Iranians on notice and put an ally at risk? It really is troubling. I will say, Wolf, in terms of the timing, as Barbara was mentioning about the spring, we know that there's been an ongoing dialogue. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Marty Dempsey, was on a recent trip to Israel. We know that there are ongoing exchanges of intelligence information. So one must presume that if Leon Panetta is saying this, he's got a real basis, a credible basis for saying it. And the other thing we know that's going to happen is the IAEA is preparing to meet and issue another report. And what we're hearing is that Israel and the United States are expecting that to be another hard-hitting, very critical report of Tehran. So all of this sort of suggests that, you know, Panetta's got real reason for saying this. It just doesn't seem to be a real smart thing to do, to be willing to signal that, unless he's hoping to put pressure on the Iranians to step back from their program. But we haven't seen any evidence that that works yet.
Did you? I assume you saw the testimony of the intelligence chiefs up on Capitol Hill this week, including the Director of National Intelligence, suggesting that the U.S. should be prepared for potentially for Iranian-sponsored terrorist attacks on U.S. soil, that's a possibility. You heard that this week, Fran.
Right. And look, what that's really a reference to, we have known Iran is the largest single state sponsor of terrorism in the world and has been for decades because of their financial and arming of Hezbollah. Hezbollah hasn't acted against U.S. interests inside the United States. We know they acted against our Marines in the Beirut barracks bombing in the 80s and in Buenos Aires against Jewish and Israeli targets. So it would seem odd. The reason I think you heard General Clapper make that reference is because of the recent reports of the plot to kill the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. in Washington. That really is a change of tactics for the Iranians, and so I think that the intelligence community and the law enforcement community now believe that's no longer sort of off the table for Iran to consider launching an attack inside the United States, and so they want to be alert and they want to be prepared.
And let's not forget what General Clapper said, but also what retired General David Petraeus, now the director of the CIA, told that same congressional committee. He said this, and I'm quoting Director Petraeus right now, Israel does see this possibility, namely an Iranian nuclear weapon, as an existential threat to their country, and I think that that is very important to keep that perspective in mind. Strong words from General Petraeus. At the same time, the director of the CIA. All right, Fran and Barbara, guys, will stay obviously very much on top of this story. Appreciate it very much. We'll take a quick break. Much more news right after this.